This is Gemara Nazir Daf Yod Dalid, and we're holding on Yud Gimel and Beis. We read the Mishnah, began the Gemara, but as we mentioned, we have to begin the Gemara again, as the Gemara begins a lengthy series of questions of Rava, one built upon the next. Before we begin there, let's just remind ourselves of the basic outline of the Mishnah. We're not going to go over the whole Mishnah, but let's just look at the first case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Hareini Nazir vin Nazir kshir ben. We have a dual Naziros, two things coinciding. So it says, I am a Nazir, and I'm a Nazir when I have a child. And then what happened was, his chalmai neshalai. So he begins counting his first Naziros, Hareini Nazir. Then, v'achin le'elad ben, beautiful Mazel Tov, the child that he spoke of is born. Said the Mishnah, Mashlim eshaloi, you finish your own, whatever amount of days it was, then you count your son. Whereas if you said it in the reverse, that you first said a Nazir for the child, and then said you started counting your own, then the child was born, you have to leave what you started, go to what you said first, and then go back to your own. So this is going to be the basic theme of that which we're going to discuss today. What happens when you have two Naziros that clash? How do you fulfill both terms of the Nazirs? So, Bayi Rava, we begin on the bottom of Yud Gimel Amid Beis. Omar Hareini Nazir la'achar esrim yoim. Someone says, I'm a Nazir after 20 days. U'me'achshav me'a yoim. So, in 20 days' time, I'm going to become a Nazir. And as well, I'm a Nazir today for 100 days. So, how exactly do we figure this out? Says the Gemara, Mahu. What's the halacha? 4 lines to the bottom. Kivan dahalin meya be'esrin lo shalmin. Do we say that the 100 can never be completed within 20? Meaning, maybe the reason why in the Mishnah that you could begin your own and then go do for the son, maybe the reason is because there's a potential you could finish your own Nazirs before the child is born. But over here, is there any potential? The answer is no. Why is there no potential? There's no potential because 100 days can never be finished in 20 days. Simple math. So maybe because 100 days cannot be finished in 20 days, therefore, loy chaylin. So therefore, the 100 days would not be chal, and rather he should wait, do the Naziris in 20 days, and then afterwards, he'll do the 100 days, because we go into the person's das, and we assume he didn't mean to start the 100 days to stop it in 20 days. We assume what he meant is after he finishes the Nazirais, which is going to be in how many days? 50 days. Why 50? Because in 20 he's going to start 30. That's when it kicks in. One side of the coin. Or perhaps Kivan Islay Gidol Sar, Libisayf, or maybe not. Since he could start the 100, in 20 days, what's he going to do? Do his regular Nazirs. Then he'll finish the 80 days. When he finishes the 80 days, it's a term, it's long enough to do what? To have a Gidol Sar. It's long enough to have 30 days, because again, within 80 you have 30. So it's long enough to have 30 days, which will thereby allow him to shave his head afterwards to have the din of Gidol Sar for 30 days Nazirs. Chaylin, so therefore it should be Chal. So 2 sides of the coin. Do we say the 100 days is Chal now? He stops in 20 and then he finishes, or no? Does he wait 20, do the Naziris, and then do the 100 afterwards? Asks the Gemara, this is Rava Shaila. Asks the Gemara, why was it not a Shaila to Rava? Naziros mu'ates. Why was it not a Shaila to Rava? A short Naziris, a 30 days Naziris. Why did Rava hone in on the detail of 100-day Naziris? Even a 30-day Naziris, asks the Gemara, cannot be finished within 20 days. And if that was the whole detail, he could have said a 30-day Naziris. Why is he jumping to say a 100-day Naziris? So says the Gemara, you know why? Chada migoi chada kami baile. Really, Rava, the great Rava, didn't speak mere simple words. didn't speak simple cases. Obviously, there's a lot more depth, says the Gemara, if the Shaila and Rava than you gave him credit for. So Rava's asking about Chada Migoy Chada, one based on another. That the long one based on what you would have said on the short one. What does that mean? So now the Gemara articulates, as we turn over to Yedalit Amud Aleph, to today's Gemara. The Gemara now is going to go through and explain what really are the hidden shaylos in the words of Rava. From the case of Rava, again, 100 days and a Nazirus that's chal after 30 days. What we could glean from such a case. So says the Gemara, Im Tim Solaymar, on the top of Yedalit Amud Aleph. If you're going to tell me Naziros Mu'atas, that if we have a 30-day Naziros, Kivan Da'asara Yaiminu Diyasrin, what would happen if you play out the case? Play out 30 days. So you start your 30 days. 20 days later, boom, the other Naziris kicks in. So the other Naziris kicks in. How much is left? 10 days. But since there's only 10 days left, Lo Yisalik Le'halan Asara, the 10 do not count. And therefore we assume, since he doesn't, 10 days is nothing in the world of Naziris. So we assume he didn't mean to do that. But rather what? Rather wait 20 days, do your Naziris of 30 days, and then do these 30 days afterwards. Vadai Nazir, that if you were to say that, then Vadai Nazir Me'ayim, in the case when someone says he's a Nazir of 100 days, Vadai for sure, since you can have 80 days at the end, Salik Lu. So then maybe he could do that, meaning now he could start the 100 days because there's going to be at least 30 days left over at the end, like we explained. So answers the Gemara, this is what is hidden within the Shaila of Rava, meaning an intim Sulaimar. That he didn't want to just ask about an Nazirus Mu'atas. He wanted to include that in his larger Shaila. That if you're going to tell me that by Nazirus Mu'atas, by 30-day Nazirus, you know why it doesn't start right now? Because there's not going to be a full 30 days left at the end. Fine. But what if there is a full 30 days left at the end? Then do we let it start now and finish those days after? Or no? Or do we say that it goes afterwards? That is the Shaila of Rava. And based off of this, it leads us to another question. 4 lines down. Vim Tim Solaymar Chayli. And if you're going to say, because there's 80 days left over at the end, it could yes be Chali, yes starts right now. Omar Reini Nazir Lacher Chaf Yaim. What is the halacha? If he says, I'm a Nazir after 20 days. Okay, so far sounds similar. Ume Achshav Nazir Eilam. Not that he's a Nazir for 100 days, but he's a Nazir Eilam. Mahu, what's the halacha in this case? Michayla alei oilai. Do we say that it's the same thing as 100 days, and therefore it takes effect immediately, you take a break, and then you finish it because you certainly have 30 days left over? Oilai? Or do we say that no? Maybe the fact that he says it's a Nazir Eilam, he wants it to be its own category and classification of Nazir Eilam. And therefore, he wants it to start onto its own. So if you're going to tell me a Nazir of 100 starts today, what about a Nazir of forever? Continues the Gemara, Im Tim Solaymar, and this really brings us in the next Shaila. It shows us a little bit of the depth in the previous Shaila of a Nazir Eilam. If you're going to tell me, since you could have undone a regular 30-day Naziros, therefore the Nazir Eilam takes effect right away. Meaning, when he said in 20 days I will kick in on Naziros, he could have been shayl on that. He could have undid that. So maybe that's a reason that the Nazir Eilam is chal today, right away. So what's the halacha? Amar Areini Nazir Shimshon lacher asim riyayim. What if he says I'm a Nazir Shimshon after 20 days? Omei achshav Nazir stam. And today I'm a stam Nazir 30 days. Now, what do we say now? Now for all these Gemaras, we have to know everything we learned. What's the nikudah? What's the detail of difference in Nazir Olam? Do we say that over here in the case of Nazir Shimshon, there's no way, that's the whole creation of a Nazir Shimshon, that you can't undo it? So therefore, that would be a reason to say that it should not necessarily take effect right away. Again, the Imtim Salomer previously was, since you could undo your 30-day Naziros, it should be Chal today. So now the question is, if he says I'm a Nazir Shimshon after 20 days, that can't be undone. So that's for sure going to go into effect after 20 days. So maybe because it can't be undone, the Nazir Stam should not take effect. Michaila, Oilai, or not. So that is, I think that's Shaila number 4. So those are 3 Intim Solaimars built upon each other. And now the Gemara continues with another question. We're about 12 lines down. The first word in line is Oilai, as well as we're about 10 lines up. The first word in line is Oilai, Yudal Amid Aleph. Kim Moshe b'Shiva ba'Adar Mahu. What is the halach of someone says, like Moshe on the 7th of Adar? Now we know the 7th of Adar is the day, the yard site, the day of the Petira of Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, as well, of course, it's the day that he was born, as we learned in the Gemara and Megillah. So therefore, the question is, on days of Avelos, on days of sorrow in Klal Yisrael, there was a minhag, there was customs that they made Naziros. They made Naziros to abstain, to mark the yard site of different calamities, etc. And therefore, many people, presumably, did such when Moshe Rabbeinu was nifter. So what's the question? Do we say that when someone says he's a Nazir, Kim Moshe, on the 7th of Adar, do we say that that's what his intention is, to take on Nazirus? Or do we say that, wait, the 7th of Adar was a happy day? Why was it a happy day? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was also born on that day, as we know. So which detail did he mean if he says, Kim Moshe b'Shiva ba'Adar? Again, I'm sorry, that was a little long-winded. Let's explain it properly. He didn't say the word Nazir. Someone says, you know what I am? Like Moshe on the 7th of Adar. So what does he mean? Does he mean since Moshe Rabbeinu died that day, therefore he wants to be a Nazir, or no? Moshe Rabbeinu was born that day, so it has nothing to do with being a Nazir. So after all these questions, says the Gemara, Pasha T'minayu Kadmaisa. Let's go all the way back and let's answer up the first question. It says in a Raisa, Hareini Nazir Tesefta. Someone says, I'm a Nazir after 20 days. This should sound familiar. This is how we began today. I'm a Nazir after 20 days. And from today for 100 days. This was Rava's first Sha'ayla. Says the Raisa, Moina Esrin, you count 20. V'achach Moina Shleishim, then you count 30. V'achar Kach Moinim Shmoinim. Meaning, you start the 100, you take a break for the 30, and then you finish the 80. Why? Kedei lahashrim neziros rishayna. In order to complete the first neziros. So we have an explicit brisa telling us we don't wait for the 100 days, it starts right away. So now we didn't answer up to all the other shaylas, but the Gemara continues 5 lines from the bottom and asks, this is a first cousin to this discussion. Nitma bimei benoi. What is the halacha if he became tamei during the days of his son's Nazirus? Again, in the Mishnah, what do we say? He began his own Nazirus, then his son is born, so he interrupts his own Nazirus. He goes and he does his son's Nazirus, and then he finishes his own Nazirus. So we're seeing that what's he doing? He's pausing his Nazirus for his son's Nazirus. So what happens if after he pauses his Nazirus, and now he's doing the Nazirus for the birth of his son, he becomes Tameh in those days? What's the halacha? Rav Yochanan Amar, 4 lines to the bottom, Soiser. Says Rav Yochanan, it is Soiser, and messes up the Nazirus, not only, as we're going to see in a second, the Nazirus of his son, but even his own Nazirus, which again, let's just understand. He's in the middle of his own Nazirus. He braked, started his son's Nazirus. Now he became Tameh. So basically, do we say that just blows up this, his son's Nazirus, or no? Since he's in the middle of his own Nazirus, the whole thing blows up. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Reish Lakish Amar, no, Einoi, Soiser, does not mess up his own Nazirus. What does it mess up? Only the son's Nazirus. Just to give a case, let's say he did 20 days of his own. Now he's 10 days into the Nazirus of his son. Says Rabbi Yochanan, the whole thing is up in smoke. You got to start everything again. Says Reish Lakish, no. His own 20 days that he did, that's fine. But now the 30 days for the son, that's messed up. So he has to redo the 30 and then finish off 10 of his own 30 that he was up to. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, no, he has to redo the son and then redo his whole thing. Explains the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Saiser, the whole thing is blown up. Why? Chad and Nazir Zarechtohi. In Lamdus, Rabbi Yochanan views it. When he says his own Nazirs and adds on Nazirs for the son, it's all one long block of time. So it's true he did 20 of his own. It's true he's 10 days into the son, but it's all one long Naziros. Boom, one's blown up, the whole cookie crumbles. Reish Lakish Amar, no. Einai Saiser, why? Nazirs Tidei Lachad, Udibrei Lachad. Each are its own Naziras, and the fact that he messes up the sons does not tamper, does not mess with the fact that he already observed his own part of his own Naziras prior, and therefore says Reish Lakish halacha is going to be, of course, the son's Naziras is messed up, that's going to have to be rectified. But once he rectifies that and finishes the Naziras another 30 days for the kid, his own Naziras will just have to finish up wherever he was holding. In our example of 10 days left, and therefore he'll do his 10 days. And we turn over to Amud Beis, and that's the Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. We continue on a similar vein that what happens if whilst one is a Nazir, he becomes a Mitzaira. He contracts Saras while he is a Nazir. We know that Saras and Naziros have similar halachis. So similar to the previous discussion that he's a Nazir for himself, a Nazir for his son, becomes Tameh and the Nazir for the son, does it blow up the whole thing or just the Nazirs for his son? What happens if he was a Nazir, then he became a Mitzaira? Now, what's the story in such a scenario? He has to finish the Naziros after he finishes his Saras. Similar to he has to finish his original Naziris after he finishes the Naziris of his son. But the question now is, what happens? Yudalim in the base top line. Nitma b'mei tzaratoi. He became Tameh while he was a Mitzaira. So Rav Yochanan Amar, again, the same din Sa'iser blows up the whole thing. He has to redo the Mitzaras, and as well, it has to redo his own Naziris that he went before it. Reish Lakish Amar, Einai Sa'iser. Says Reish Lakish, no. It's true, he has to redo the Tzaras, his Mitzaira, because you can't be Tameh while you're a Mitzaira. But that which he was in his ears prior does not get messed up. Explains the Gemara again. Rav Yochanan Amar Saiser. Says Rav Yochanan, it messes up his original Naziros. Says Rav Yochanan, says Rav Yochanan, yes, it messes up his original Naziros. Why? To have been Naziros Kai? Says Rav Yochanan. Lamaisa, he's in the middle of Naziris. It's true! He took a break for his Saras. But it's not that he took a break, it's pending. So it's still there. So now when he becomes Tameh, Lamaisa, he became Tameh during his term of Nazirus, and he has to redo it. Reish Lakish Amar, the other side of the coin, Einai Tzaiser. Why? Tzaras l'chad, Naziris l'chad. So two cases, very similar, same machlekes, and of course, in classical Gemara form, 4 lines down, Yudalim and Beis, the Gemara now explains, Usricha, and you need both of these cases, because one could think they're almost the same. Explains the Gemara, if we only said the first case of when he's in Nazir for his son and he messes up that Nazirus, and Rav Yochanan says the whole thing blows up, Reish Lakish says not. But here, Rav Yochanan, Soiser Shem Nazirus Achasi. I would think you know why the whole thing blows up, says Rav Yochanan. Because it's all one Nazirus. There's a Nazirus of himself, a Nazirus of his son, but it's all Nazirus. Aval Baha, but in this case of Saras, Ema Maidel Reish Lakish, the Nazir L'chad v'Tzaras L'chad. Lamaisa, Naziros, and Mitzayra are similar, but they're not the same shame. It's not the same thing. So maybe he's Maida to Reish Lakish. V'yitmar Baha, if you only said the same second case out of the Bahakam Reish Lakish, that's where he says it's din, because there's a good plausible reason to think that they're separate entities. One in the first case, Ema Maida, Rav Yechanan, Sricha says the Gemara, we need both cases. Continues the Gemara with a similar case. Yitalim at Beis, about 10 lines down. The first word on the line is Moidele. Nitma biyoim gidol tsar. So close to the finish line. He finishes his term of Nazirus, but he didn't get a haircut yet. Before the haircut, boom, he becomes Tami. Rav Amar, says Rav, Einoi Soiser. Says Rav, he does not blow everything up. He's not messed up. And now Rav says, you know who's going to hold this? Even Rav Yochanan. Afilu the Rav Yochanan Damar Soiser, even though according to Rav Yochanan in the case of his son's Nazirus during his own Nazirus, or in the case of Mitzayra, middle of Nazirus, it's Soiser, immediately Heicha Dekai ben Nazirus. That's only whilst he's Lamaisa Nazir. Whether he's a Nazir of his son in the middle of his own Nazirus, or whether he's the Nazir and now he's a Mitzayra. But Gidol Sar Mashlan Nazirusu. But says Rav that Gidol Sar is already the end of the Naziros. And therefore he finishes and then you cut the hair. This is always a fundamental shayla in many areas of halacha. To give one example, in the halachas of Nida, we know you have to wait the 7 clean days, your Zaynikim, and then go to the mikvah. In Londus, how does that look? Is it 7 clean days? You finished your tar, quote unquote, and then you go to the mikvah? Or no? You have to finish your 7 days, and then when you go to the mikvah, you become tamei. Now, even though abstractly it seems like it's just a conceptual argument, but we see in cases like this, it becomes a very big practical ramification. So says the Rav, no one is going to hold in such a scenario when he becomes tamei right for getting a haircut that it messes him up. Shmuel Amar diametrically opposed on the opposite side of the world. Soiser. And he says, I feel Reish Lakish. Tamar Einoi Soiser. Even Reish Lakish, you normally hold, it's not Soiser. Reish Lakish holds the son's Naziris and his Naziris. Mitzayra and Naziris are different entities. Hasam over there, Shtei Naziros, it's 2 different things. But Acha Chada Nazir. So Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, what to do when one becomes Tamei in the day of getting the haircut. Says the Gemara Amar Rav Chisda, I call Maidim. To the following, says Rav Chisda, everyone could agree. Shem Kidei Sar Bidam. That if the hair was still Kadosh, and then the dam was put on the Mizbeach, and then he became Tamei, Ein loy takana. He is what we call messed up. There's nothing he could do. There's no way to conclude his Naziros. Now let's let the Gemara explain what's going on. Aliba Diman. Rav Chisda, you just told me everyone agrees. Who are you going like Rav Chisda? Aliba de Rav Eliezer. If you're going according to Rav Eliezer, who we're going to have soon, Kivan Damar Tiglachas Ma'akeves. Rav Eliezer says if you didn't get a haircut yet, it's a Ma'akev. It holds back and it's not considered that you completed your Naziris yet. So according to Rav Eliezer, Toich Malay is he. According to Rav Eliezer, it's considered that you're within the time of Naziris. And therefore what? Velistar. So who cares that you're putting the blood on the Mizbeach? What's the difference? Lamaisa, you didn't get the haircut. So according to Rav Eliezer, if you become Tamei now, literally at the finish line, too late, you still should say so it should mess you up. So Ela Aliba de Rabbanan. So you must be going, you Rav Chisda, according to Rabbanan, Ha'amri, that they hold Tiglachas loy ma'akeves, that they're getting the haircut does not hold anything back. So what's the question? So if getting a haircut doesn't hold anything back, what does Rav Chisda mean? Ein loy takana. There's no big deal. It's true, maybe he can't get a haircut right now. Why can he not get a haircut? Because he is Tamei. But Lamaisa asks the Gemara, the Rabbanan hold the haircut is not ma'akiv. It doesn't mess him up not getting a haircut. So what does Rav Chisda mean when he says, Ein loy takana? So answers the Gemara, and with this we're going to conclude for today. Lo ilam, really, I'll tell you, aliba derabanan. Umayin lo ta'akana. What does it mean he's no ta'akana? Doesn't mean, like I said, he's messed up. Ein lo ta'akana lemitzvahs kiluach. He doesn't get the spitz. He doesn't get 100%. He doesn't get the mitzvah, the concluding ritual of the Nazirus. Does he get is he out of his Nazirus? Yes, but ein lo ta'akana, and that's what Rav Chisda meant. We'll pick it up from Rav Yesi, Rav Chanina the next year. B'siyata dishmayo.